Hello folks, and welcome back to this presentation. We'll be covering chapter 2 out of my book Tales of a Self-Initiate. That's going to go over the economics, banking law, banks as credit creators, esoteric analysis of banks and money, the Anu-Elohim, the moon, and the graduation ceremony to see how it all connects into this black cube and this black cube worship that is seemingly going on. That again ties into, if you recall, in chapter 1 that we went through before, the previous presentation, this black hole subtime distortion phantom matrix. Okay, so we're going to be following, when they say follow the dots in these series of presentations, for my research I was certainly following the black cubes, which all led to this schism and these intruder races of these black holes, where there's many different factions, as we'll go over later. There's 3 main factions vying for control and dominion over the time matrix through the Stargate system, if you recall, that we introduced under chapter 1 again, which also later on we'll go into more depth as to these technologies being used that are also connected to unnatural disasters. So a lot of disasters that have happened throughout history, especially modern history, were as a result of them playing around with these technologies and the grids and these temple bases that we went over in the previous presentation with the maps. Remember the Stargate maps, which I've got behind me on the wall, if you recollect. So yeah, and this goes into weather wars too. And we just recently had a category 2 cyclone here off the east coast of Australia near Brisbane called Cyclone Alfred's, which if you followed the path of, it was absolutely not natural, as well as what Iasha dispensed last year after Hurricane Helene and Milton, which he goes into the gravitron, which is again is black hole technology being used to amplify and steer and direct and even create a lot of these weather systems, okay, that are done deliberately in order to, again, tick off multiple agendas of getting rid of any human angelic bloodlines that may still be on the planet, any opposition to try and take over, just create more chaos, loosh, and toy around with creation as these beings have done for a very long time. So you just see it at the end of the day like a pool table, billiard balls being whole solar systems and galaxies that they can just do what they want. So yeah, luckily for us, it's all coming to an end. So this chapter is a little bit more down to earth, again looking at the control structures, but then connected into the esoteric and the spiritual side of things, and these subtle forces that are working through these institutions, that have founded these institutions, that certainly Pierce Back's research that we'll go into later highlights, and that we'll read through in this presentation too. So as we see here with Richard A. Werner's famous paper titled "Can Banks Individually Create Money Out of Nothing? The Theories and the Empirical Evidence," published back in 2014, was actually the first empirical study in the 5,000-year history of banking that put to rest the over 100-year debate of theories being propounded by economics and academia and their consorts of whether banks are either 1, creators of credit, the credit creation theory, 2, fractional reserve lenders, which is the fractional reserve theory, or 3, banks as mere financial intermediaries, which is the financial intermediary theory. The first theory, as was propagated in the early part of the 20th century from around the 1920s up until 1940s, were that banks are creators of credit, and they do this every time a new loan is issued, whether for asset purchases, consumer loans, business loans, etc., which injects that new money that is created on an account of zero balance into the money supply and economy. The second theory of banks is fractional reserve lenders who, through systemic interactions, somehow contribute to the increase in the money supply, who can only loan out reserves of deposits held at the central bank, was dominant in the 1940s and the 1960s. The controllers of this system realized they were giving slightly too much information away with this theory, so they opted for a better cover. The third theory, which is banks as financial intermediaries, which has been propagated in economic textbooks since the 1960s, even to this day, which says that banks only loan out other depositors' funds held in reserve at the bank. In other words, nothing else to see here. Banks are unimportant to economic models. Please move on. The implications to the economy and monetary policy is obviously very important when ascertaining which one is the truth. Richard A. Werner decided to do the scientific thing and actually go into a bank and take out a loan whilst tracking the internal accounting to see where that money came from. Staggeringly, no economist up until that point thought to conduct an empirical study to move the science from theory to practice when it came to banking, economic models, and what really drove whole economies and inflation. Werner found that banks do in fact create money from nothing whenever a new loan is issued, which accounts for a 97% increase to the money supply, with 3% being attributed to fractional reserve lending interaction, proving that banks are creators of credit under the credit creation theory. They do this by reclassifying accounts payable liabilities into a new fictitious customer deposit when purchasing the promissory note, which is your loan agreement or anyone's loan agreement, within their internal IT accounting system, which extends the balance sheet. We've got a figure on the next slide that will show this process on the T-Ledger accounting system, double entry bookkeeping system, and creates the new money on account. This applies for any loan, whether it be personal, commercial, or government. So having a banking license is literally permission to create money from nothing, something that banking regulation does not recognize, as they've been doctored to believe banks as financial intermediaries, no thanks to the subterfuge in academia that has influenced public opinion and the regulators, wherein their main focus, as with the Basel III Accord, is on capital reserve requirements, a reality that's far removed from practice. In contrast, the real driver of the economy and policy that is being implemented unchecked is that of window/credit guidance by the central banks to all the banks when fulfilling quotas they issue of how much new money they want pumped into the economy and for what purpose, i.e. asset purchases, financial speculation, consumer spending, and all productive means, which is business lending. The latter contributing to sustainable growth, with all formal ones contributing towards boom-bust cycles, business cycles, unemployment, inequality, inflation, bubbles, etc., as you are giving increased purchasing power over existing assets, which will of course be inflationary, something Werner has observed as being used to manipulate economies and create unnecessary hard times, revealing quite obviously their agenda. And I've got here the Ba'an Ka, which we'll go into later, Juno Monato, the bridge, the pontiff, the intercession, Saturn and the moon, the moonitary, monopoly, moon eye, how it all connects into, again, this black cube. Philosophy, ideologies, and technologies used by these races, the moonarchy as well, and how banks always have their holiday on a moon day, which is venerating, the black cube of the moon, which is connected into Saturn, which is connected into Abaddon, Apollyon, and the mortarboard Satanic graduation ritual that luckily I avoided with my ceremonies. I worked it out as I was taking my economics degree. So as you can see here, you've got the tables out of another paper of his that shows and details what's going on in the accounting. So table 1, comparative accounting, taking out a loan and dispersing it. You have on the bottom here description. So this table shows how accounting conventions handle the granting and dispersing of a loan by different types of firms. A non-financial corporation, with abbreviated NFC, a non-bank financial institution, NBFI, e.g. a stockbroker, as compared to a bank on the right there, it's highlighted in orange. In this and the following tables, only the change in balance sheet items is shown. As can be seen, something is different in the case of the bank. So you've got step 1, lender and borrower agree. So the contract signed, but no money dispersed as yet. So this table shows step 1 of the loan operation, now disaggregated into 2 steps. All parties have signed the loan contract, but the borrower has asked out of convenience to delay the disbursement of the loan, which happens in step 2. Interestingly, at step 1, it is seen that the accounting treatment is the same for all lenders, including the bank. Banks are not different in any way concerning step 1. But then in step 2, under table 3 here, the money is dispersed, the loan funds are paid out, and it shows, this table shows step 2 of the loan operation disaggregated into 2 steps. All lenders now disperse the loan and thus discharge the liability. For firms without a banking license, the balance sheet contracts and thus reverts back to the original position. For banks, only the balance sheet remains unchanged in its expanded position. Banks remain stuck in step 1. In other words, banks do not discharge their liability. Okay, so you can see there, they simply swap it from an accounts payable liability as a fictitious customer deposit, which acts to extend the balance sheet, whereas the NBFI and the NFC, it's all been paid out and transferred and left the liabilities on the balance sheet. So what's more, in law, the courts have made it very clear that banks do not loan out money and banks do not take deposits. And there's 2 famous cases, Foley versus Hill in 1848 and Croton versus R in 1967, that re-emphasizes this fact. So what do? They are in the business of purchasing securities, which is your promissory note, which is the loan agreement. and taking loans from the public to be held under a special type of debtor-creditor relationship. In effect, if you have an account standing to your credit with a bank, that is seen as a loan and a debt the banker owes you. It is not held in custody, bailment or trust, nor principal-agent relationship, unless of course it is a trust account where a constructive trust extends the fiduciary duty to the banker akin to a trustee. You are the creditor who has a chosen action and a right to demand repayment whenever you make a demand for it, which is normally in the form of checks, withdrawals, transfers, etc. This is confirmed again with the courts, wherein if the bank were to go bankrupt where you have an account standing to your credit, you will be deemed simply as an unsecured creditor. Important to note, as all banking regulators define banks as being authorized depository institutions that loan out other depositors' money as reserves held within the central bank, which is evidently not the case. In order to divert the attention away from this hidden mechanism of banks creating credit that shapes whole economic landscapes, they have framed and proliferated the whole interest rate discourse as being the main policy tool to stem inflation and control economies, along with, during times of crises, quantitative easing, which was pioneered by Richard A. Werner in Japan, who first administered this tool but had been implemented incorrectly, as he found out, more often than not, in order to prop up Wall Street rather than the real economy, which is the small and medium-sized businesses. And this knowledge is certainly very powerful and that can utilize in your life if you've ever taken a loan out with the bank, and certainly scrutinize the contract and challenge them as to where that money's come from, whilst utilizing as evidence, submitting and admitting as evidence, right, in a court case, if you want to set off your mortgage or whatever else, these papers from Richard A. Werner, which is empirical, you can't argue, it's showing exactly what is going on, that the emperor has no clothes on. So yeah, we can use this knowledge to our benefit, which is obviously what I teach over on my website and on YouTube videos that I've already covered extensively, his works and research, and how it fits all together, how it fits together with the economic model and set up down here with controlling resources and populations. So another paper titled Reconsidering Monetary Policy, an empirical examination of the relationship between interest rates and nominal GDP growth in the US, UK, Germany and Japan, published in 2018 by Richard A. Werner, which by the way took him 7 years to publish as it was very sensitive, found that interest rates tend to follow economic growth rather than lead, and shows a positive correlation as opposed to a negative correlation, as is conventionally held as a belief for monetary policy in economics to control inflation. Rather, the interest rate discourse is a pseudo-rationale used to entrain/engage public opinion and keep the financial scribblers busy and regulators unchecked, whilst the real driver of economic growth and inflation is kept hidden. So as we'll find out later, and as Werner concluded, it's been a controlled science since very early on, which has been the model for a lot of other so-called sciences, right? Especially within the medical sciences and the energy sciences. So Werner also emphasizes that in conventional academic textbooks, economics is based on equilibrium, where prices are key in dictating equilibrium between supply and demand in any one market. To the contrary, in order for equilibrium to be present, economists assume that 8 axioms/assumptions must be maintained at all times for this theory to be effective, which you can see there on the slide. The likelihood of these holding in reality is less than 1% when assigning an optimistic probability of 55% to each axiom, meaning the probability of partial equilibrium in any one market approaches 0. Economists assume the following axioms: perfect information, complete markets, perfect competition, instantaneous price adjustment, 0 transaction cost, no time constraints, profit maximization, nobody is influenced in any way by the actions of others. As Werner remarks, economics has been using mathematical rhetoric to enhance the impression of operating scientifically. Equilibrium is a theoretical construct unlikely to be observed in practice. This demonstrates that reality is instead characterized by ration markets. These are not determined by prices, but quantities. In disequilibrium, the short side principle applies. Whichever quantity of supply and demand is smaller can be transacted, and the short side has the power to pick and choose with whom to trade, not rarely abusing this market power by extracting rents. The famous supply and demand curve seen in Figure 2 is economists' go-to for explaining most market phenomena. You have a downward sloping demand curve, an upward sloping supply curve, prices on the y-axis and quantities on the x-axis. You can have the chart represent the quantity of money, M, by the price I, interest rates. And you can also have L, labour, by the price W, wages. For goods and services, simply quantity, Q, by the price P. But as discussed above, markets never clear, and equilibrium is a fantasy, thus rendering the whole school of economics theoretical jargon and a controlled science that has been the model for many other sciences to control the whole world. It's important to note that the template for producing an abundant economic system is known, and that is predicated on a decentralized banking system that has many small local community banks who are guided through window guidance to lend mainly for productive means, in which policy and regulation recognizes this fact, and wherein the central bank is owned by the government, which is a sovereign for the people government, not for the private corporations as it is now, and can issue debt interest free, money for their citizens, all contributing to a system that is very prosperous, sustainable and healthy. Something which Werner talks about extensively in his papers and presentations, and advocates for the need for this, as the current rulers of this system are planning to establish a Stalin-esque monobank under a new world order wherein central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, will be utilized, which will give them absolute power to corrupt absolutely. A key fact to consider is that since the Federal Reserve Bank in America was established, some 10,000 local community banks have been shut down, i.e. the banking system has become more consolidated/concentrated. Likewise, in the European Union, since the establishment of the European Central Bank, the ECB, around 4,000 local community banks have been put out of business. It's the spider destroying the starfish model of decentralized local community infrastructure, and it is plain to see their agenda unfolding with what they are trying to lock in. And there's a snapshot of a really good book called The Starfish and the Spider, which goes into detailing the two models that we have through centralized systems and decentralized systems, which goes again right into the kind of philosophies and ideologies and hierarchies and structures of the fallen angelic crew of these intruder races, who are very controlling because they have to be. They're in a finite, imploding, scarcity economic, fighting for resources system in order to feed, to perpetuate their immortality. So it's an artificial eternity and artificial immortality that they must derive a very strict, austere regiment and militant control structure, which has to be centralized, right, in order to control every facet from the top of the chain all the way down in this pyramidal type structure, juxtaposed an eternal life system where everyone's living, respecting one another. There's no hierarchy. There is obviously respect in understanding that some beings have more experience than others, but they don't look down on those beings who are lesser than them. It's more egalitarian, thus more decentralized. Okay, and so that book is highly recommends reading. So it gives plenty of examples, not only within the economic models, but within cultures throughout history, with tribes as well, especially as to why and how the decentralized model is much more favorable for prosperity for humanity and for all of creation, how God source effectively sets up eternity and eternal life systems, right, for all of us to enjoy, which seems to be the basis, of a very communal and prosperous and egalitarian, equitable system. So we're going to dive into the esoteric analysis now of banks and money with the Anu-Elohim and the moon, and then finish off with the graduation ceremony. So good resource that I found that kind of goes into this is from Kenneth Scott, who created the Gemstone University, and he goes over an interesting take on the origin of bank and banking procedure in regards to the two-pillar Freemasonic system that originates out of Egypt and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, talking about how the Ba and the Ka are two bodies, the former being the soul and your corporeal form, and the latter being the higher spiritual body, so you can be amongst the gods. The goal being to merge the Ba with your Ka and have eternal life. The process involved the rites, rituals, and money to pay for it, wherein between the Ba and Ka is the bridge, and you have to pay your way to the controllers, trolls at the bridge taking their toll of this matrix system in order to merge the two, which was only affordable by the elite. Otherwise beautifully emphasized by the Catholic Church and the papal edicts, laying claim to the souls, bodies, and lands of the earth under the triple crown of Baal and Triregnum, wherein they held the keys to heaven and set up the church for intercession and penance to reclaim your supposed lost estate and gain salvation. Pontiff sharing the root word of pont, which is linked again to a bridge. The word An is linked to Anu, as in the Anu-Elohim, a new race from the fallen faction of the Elohim who broke away from the Emerald Covenant within this time matrix 250 billion years ago, according to the MCO AMCC teachings, which led to the Great War and original sin that blew up the higher dimensional gates in Lyra and created this reverse 11-dimensional subtime distorted phantom matrix. It also ties into the Anunnaki, which is a race that were created by the fallen Anu-Elohim as an avenger race to go after the newly planted human angelic races some 550 million years ago, who had the codes to the stargates and were created as a cosmic doctor race to help heal this time matrix through planetary incarnational cycles of anchoring higher dimensional energies, helping to connect the planet back to eternal life mathematics, and for bioregenesis programs of fallen races and souls who defected and wanted a path back for organic eternal life ascension under the Emerald Covenant through the human angelic form and template, if that's base substrand base 12 template that plugs us back into the Cathara grid, as we've gone over with the Stargate system. Anu, as Kenneth Scott claims, is the master puppet who lives up in heaven and goes by many names above the arch of the two pillars supporting it, symbolized by the all-seeing eye. It's obviously a false heaven in the Phantom Matrix, I would add, who plays both sides of good and evil. Black and white are symbolized by the famous Freemasonic checkerboard floor, which reflects the game of chess being played down here, where society is controlled through the two pillars of the priest, which is the ecclesiastical law, and the king, law of the land. This also goes into technologies that are called the 64-bit checkerboard matrix mutation by the Anunnaki Nibiruan, especially the Nibiruan Anunnaki that plugs into the moon, connects into Nibiru, that then connects into Wormwood, as well as Stonehenge near Stargate 11 in Velopousi, England, which then is distributed throughout all the Nibiruan crystal dyadic bases, that you see on that Stargate map as well. So it all connects. That's what they certainly have turned this place into, a chessboard Earth and a prison planet that's running all of these discordant extreme polarity programs within our template, within the Earth's template too, the victim victimizer VV drama as well, predator prey, all of this. The Temple Juno Moneta in Rome supposedly had a bridge wherein you had to pay your moneta at the toll in order to get into the inner sanctum, symbolizing this intercession and medium that had been established in order to grant access to individuals who could pay their way, whether in this life and or the afterlife, to certain bennies, rights and privileges. So the word un within the Ba'anka, bank, is symbolic of this intercession and mediumship of control designed to give the ones controlling the moneta or money ultimate control of the energy that is the main token piece of the matrix that is used to aid in controlling manifestation / flow of energy down here. An important metaphor, bank being symbolic in water with reference to rivers, in which the riverbanks control the flow of water to the sea. The current circulates the water in the sea, hence currency, and the banks are there to control the flow through window guidance of bank credit creation. The moon also being an important factor in controlling the waters here, with the ebb and flow of tides, menstrual cycles, wherein the water breaks when new babies are being birthed. Two variations of the spelling of that name, one with an E, one with an I, as you guys should be familiar with. On the dock, after transit through the birth canal, where a doctor is ready to receive the new vessel that goes from the mothership to the citizenship of the government, which the word government originates from the Latin gubernare, which means to steer or pilot a boat. Astrologers have the moon domiciled in Cancer, which is cardinal water sign, and is also claimed to be the gateway of men and women descending into this material realm, with Capricorn, its opposite, the gateway of the gods, ruled by Saturn. I put here a comment maybe more like the gateway of false gods within the fallen phantom matrix. Water is linked to the soul, which is linked to memory, which the Arabs have mem for water, which shares the root and prefix of memory, linked to the psyche, which is Greek for soul, synonymous with psychology, which is the logic of the psyche, which is otherwise the mind or the soul, both interchangeable. M being a letter, more so in its lowercase form, that symbolizes waves of water also. So you can see how this all synchronizes and connects. Pay particular attention to the prefix and word mon, as this is symbolic of the one and the moon, wherein you have the moony system, as we alluded to earlier, the money system being the moon eye system. So any MON words, you can just put an extra zero in there and it'll be relating to the moon. Okay, so we also have the monai, representing the one eye, or all-seeing eye akin to the watches, dragons, shining ones, and fallen seraphim in Pierce Bach's works. The monopoly symbolizing the one ruling the many, moonopoly, poly meaning many, And you have the monetary, which is the moonetary system, and the moonarchy, which obviously is the monarchy. Bank holidays are always universally held on the Monday, as well, which these 7 days of the week all share their roots to the planetary bodies in our skies, with Saturday being linked to Saturn, hence why the Jews go to the synagogue on a Saturn day and wear all black. The colour of Saturn, master of money, banking and finance. The money changers that Jesus kicked out of the temples and the scribes and Pharisees he warned, which the moon is said to be a satellite for, with David Icke's material on the Saturn-Moon matrix. And as I'll prove later, when dissecting Saturn and the moon, they're both, again, closely related to the black cube, which is all part of this black cube matrix of the black hole technologies and these fallen races. Sunday representing the sun, closely tied to Christianity, where they go to church on a Sunday to venerate, worship that celestial deity, which shares the same phonetic root in the first syllable as day. Tuesday in French is Mardi, Mars, where we get our martial law and arts from. Wednesday venerating Woden or Odin, or Woden's Day, or in the French Mercredi, and in the Roman pantheon is Mercury, messenger of the gods. In Egypt, Thoth, Greek Hermes, which is connected to Buddhism and mindfulness, hence the term mercurial, associated with the mastery of the mental faculties. We have Thursday being Thor, Thor's Day, linked to Jupiter or Zeus in the Greek pantheon, Jupiter Zeus, Jesus. The jovial one by Jove, associated with Christianity again, as found with Thanksgiving, always falling on a Thor's Day, wherein Jupiter is domiciled in Pisces, in astrology, which has defined this age as the sun has been rising in this sign for the last 2,000 years at the vernal equinox, which governs, I believe, right, the age of belief-based systems. Something which the age of Aquarius, being governed by I know, is slowly unraveling and shifting the psyche of humanity to dispel these ghost spells, gospels, propagated by the priesthood in order to rise out of the realm of ignorance and seek truth from facts. Then we have Friday linked to Venus, which also exalts in Pisces, with the Norse labeling this goddess as Freya, hence Freya Day, Greek Aphrodite, where Christians eat fish on a Friday to venerate the fisher of men, Jesus, and also has ties with Islam, where Muslims go to the mosque on a Friday. This will all become important and relevant later when we start dissecting the mysteries, occult practices and characters who have come and gone throughout history, which all share a common root with these celestial bodies. And yeah, particularly with Venus and this age of Pisces and Jupiter, very, very interesting under chapter 7 when we dissect Lucifer and Scorpio too. So by the time I graduated university in 2016, I had worked out the occult ritual of the graduation ceremony with the black gown and the mortar cap, signifying the squaring off of one's mind, wherein you are only given 1 degree out of 360, in which the Freemasons/rulers of the system use you as a mortarboard to mix their cement, literally and metaphorically, to help maintain the hive of worker bees needed to perpetuate the art of Babylonian slave driving techniques, aka population control, by keeping everyone within a certain bandwidth of ignorance of the truth in many major subjects, such as with economics, health, and the energy sciences. As we said before, the economic sciences have been that model that has been used in other sciences in order to control them. The black gown is symbolic of Saturn, and the square is linked to boxing in the mind of the individual through the controlled curriculum, which is most often doctored, as in the case with economics, on theoretical nonsense that regurgitates itself within the commercial arena, upon which the graduate initiates him or herself into, whilst carrying the burden of debt from student loans created on account of zero balance, as debt incumbent households do not go on strike, in which becomes the inevitable cross and burden one carries throughout their life when using debt to finance their whole existence from cradle to grave. Thus debt, which is the moneta of this current system, is linked to sin, which was also the Mesopotamian god representing the moon. See, it all connects. So it's no wonder why I did not partake in this satanic ritual, Saturnic ritual, nor pay a penny toward my student loan, and rightly so, as has been proven, with economics certainly being the best example of how academia has been infiltrated by these dark priesthoods to perpetuate absolute garbage-based theoretical nonsense, which, as Werner quite rightly stated in one of his presentations, when quoting a passage from Alice in Wonderland, Alice laughed. "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day, where sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." And Werner concludes, "Now realise that Alice in Wonderland couldn't be a good economist. She was far too realistic. But even the Queen in Wonderland, who had most practice in believing the possible things, could not be a good economist. Why? because it's totally insufficient to only believe 6 impossible things in just before breakfast. If you want to be an economist, you have to believe at least 8 impossible things all the time. All right, so I've actually got a very good case to put together that I will eventually get around to doing, to sue the education board in the United Kingdom that was responsible for, and still responsible for, drafting up the curriculum of economics, right, which is all predicated on false theories. Okay, and obviously have my student loan set off and claim for damages, and hopefully again be the change I wish to see on this planet and put knowledge to good use, because it is very empowering once you have the knowledge, and wisdom is putting knowledge into action, right, and having that understanding. So very, very powerful for folks who get introduced to this for the first time. Highly recommend going over this again, but I've also got more detailed presentations that I'll put together as well of going into this subject even further with the banking law and the economics, and how we can apply this in law in order to free ourselves. And that's also on my course on my website. Okay, so very, very powerful. And it's just that people need to get up to speed with what is actually going on and understand the processes surrounding, court procedure, especially in order to, sue people, because we have that right in order to correct the records and claim for fraud and damages that has been done to us. Now that we have the proof, the emperor literally has got no clothes, but it's all dependent on us as a people to change the outside reflection of our own ignorance, to come back into control, to diminish the power that these institutions have, and these dark occultists and priesthoods and these fallen angelics behind them, puppeteering them, that we're the ones that have all the power. We've just been blank slated, we've forgotten as we come in here. But now that, thanks to the age of the internet and age of information, we can access all this wonderful material and just put in a little bit of effort to learn and then apply it and not be scared, right? Because, certainly off the back of all these presentations, you come to learn that we are very powerful beings, but we're just suffering from amnesia and scrambled DNA. So once we put the pieces of ourselves back together, they fear us big time, and that's what they're fearing, for us waking up, and enough of us to wake up, right? So now's the time to be that change and make your life, empower yourself and make your life a lot freer and prosperous by, going and do these things and not fearing the consequences, and putting pressure on these guys to change the system to help everyone out down here. So yeah, I'm going to go and put a case together and speak with someone in the UK and sue the educational board responsible for educating me for 3 years of my life, and then wasting 8 years. I think it took 9 years after I left university for me to finally come into, probably more actually, probably like 11, 12 years before I came into this knowledge of what Richard A. Werner published with his papers and his findings. That blew the whole smokescreen and mirrors away for me to understand what exactly is going on. So I basically wasted 3 years of my life, but that's again linked into what normally happens to people when they're initiated and they go through that journey of awakening. They come into many levels of deception right before they then come into the truth, and that's all part of the trials and tribulations as well that goes on when we shed all these false layers of these programs that have been embedded into us ever since we've been blank slated down here. Okay, so thanks for listening, folks, and tuning in again. In the next chapter 3, we're going to be going over my Crown Chakra Awakening event, the Great Sign in Heaven, Jehovah's trumpets, symbolism, and the Aleister Crowley Luciferian Nephilim companion that buddied up to me during the early days of my awakening. So yeah, thanks for watching. As always, stay safe and stay sovereign. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.